This is your World War III update. Gold is $4,200 an ounce. Donald Trump is getting ready to start launching Tomahawk nuclear-capable missiles deep inside Russia. The Canadian government is getting ready to confiscate all the guns, and there's paramilitary in the streets of the United States, armed with automatic weapons in some cases, pulling people out of their vehicles because they don't fit the appropriate profile in what appears to be some quasi-state of martial law. Now, I know there's people with the red hats who think that the blue hairs are never going to get in power again, so that they might leverage that authoritarian apparatus that has currently been set up. But on that, you'd be sadly mistaken. Mark my words, when the Dems get back in power in 2028, they are going to leverage these egregious violations of people's constitutional rights to the fullest. And that's when you're going to get your civil war. Anyways, let's talk about Trump and these Tomahawk missiles, shall we? I want to remind people of something, because most people forget the through line and the foreshadowing that we've seen. What happened in 2019? And this is where the story all began. It began in 2014, but it really began with the javelins, right? It began in 2019 when Donald Trump said, you know what? Or the people who, moved Donald Trump, because I don't think he makes these operational decisions, not at all, not even strategic decisions. He's the guy who tries to look good and, entertains us like the bread and circus emperor he is. Trump decided to get out of the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty. This, of course, was a treaty that was put in place in order to expand the reaction time that nuclear nations had, well, specifically it was just for the Russians and the Americans, in order to de-escalate. It was for the purpose of nuclear deconfliction. So the thinking was that if you had these intermediate missiles that had a very short period of time that they could be launched from submarines, they could be launched in various places throughout Europe, they could reach their targets much faster than a Minuteman missile. Not that they travel faster, but they could be positioned in a way which was bridging the gap, shortening the distance, shortening the amount of time that the other side would have to make to calculate a decision as to whether or not they wanted to shoot all of their nuclear missiles and end the world. Well, Trump got out of that in 2019. Now just follow this through line, because this is quite the story when you really think about what's going on with the delivery of Tomahawks today. The Tomahawk missile falls under this treaty, okay? So here we are in 2025. Back in 2019, Trump backs out of the treaty, okay? Because they claimed that the Russians were cheating. Maybe they were, maybe they weren't. I'm not trying to sit here and moralize for the Russians at all. You guys know me better than that. Russia basically then abandoned the treaty earlier this year. But before that, Putin stated, and many Russian officials have stated, that this was one of the main reasons for the war in Ukraine in the first place, was this backing out of the INF treaty. Then, just a couple weeks after Trump won the election, what did the Russians do? Well, they launched an Orezhnik missile, which is a new class of hypersonic missile which you practically can't defend against, at least not with anything that we currently know, or at least it hasn't really been tested enough to know whether our most advanced systems can defend against it, okay? There's video of it online. Poland recently got the Aegis Ashore system. I believe they got that under Joe Biden. These have the capacities to launch Tomahawk missiles as well, and I believe Romania has one of those. Now, in August, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I think this was after the Alaskan summit, it might have been before, but the Russians formally abrogated this INF thing and they abandoned it altogether, and now it's, basically, there's no aspects of this treaty which are effectively being honored. Just a week ago, the United States said that they were going to be unveiling new mobile launchers for the Tomahawk missiles, okay? And of course, earlier in the year, I think it was last year under Biden, they had promised Germany that they were going to get Tomahawk missiles in 2026. So as much as the Russia bros like to downplay this and act like it's not a big deal, conventionally it might not be, even if you were to put 100 of these on various Russian targets with a conventional munition, it likely wouldn't, change things that much. Nonetheless, you can see how this has been foreshadowed long ago. I mean, in 2019, Trump backs out of the INF Treaty, and 6 years later, he's sending Tomahawk missiles, which weren't supposed to be in Europe, period. Now he's giving them to a country that is currently at war, direct proxy with the Russians. Okay? So never before in history, never before, even during the Cuban Missile Crisis, because arguably the Russians didn't really have the capacity at that period of time to bring to bear as much death and destruction as they could potentially right now. Never before have we been so close to the brink. And the probability has only increased. Never throughout this last 3 years, there might have been a certain, weekend or so where I was like, man, I gotta not travel this weekend because things are getting a little weird. There have been some moments of consternation where I've been quite concerned that things were going to escalate, but throughout this entire process, we just keep getting closer. We keep moving the red line closer and closer and closer. And here we are at the tail end of this diplomatic charade that Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin is dignifying. And now Putin is starting to feel the heat at home. There are rumblings of possible coup attempts against Vladimir Putin. Now, I think that has been drastically overstated, and many people have pushed back. However, it should also be understood that if you live in let's say we believe that Russia is an authoritarian society. You can't protest there, you go to jail if you protest, period, point blank, okay? Protesting is effectively legal if it's not mandated by the state. So if we can agree on that, then we can agree that, yeah, there's some pretty stringent, restrictions on civil liberties inside Russia. This is not to say anything of the tradition and the culture and whether or not people generally live fulfilling lives in that country. It's just to say that you can't deviate too much. Dissidence is something that is not typically tolerated. And in an environment like that, you almost need an armed coup. I can't remember, there's some kind of quote where you make something, where you make revolution, or what is it? Where democracy is impossible, you make revolution inevitable, something like that, right? So there is potential pressures against Putin. And I don't think, let me get this straight, I don't think that Putin at this point in time is under any risk of some sort of military coup. If there's anything that Putin does very well, it's what they call synoptic surveillance. It's keeping enough different factions of your military so that they kind of counterbalance one another. Wagner gets out of line, you got the Chechens to check him. The Donbass and Lugansk get out of line, you get the Russian military to check them, and so on and so forth. And that condenses on a micro level as well, with the various people who encircle Vladimir Putin. So I don't think he's necessarily at risk of being dethroned. However, there is a lot of pressure on Putin right now to get more aggressive and to push back against Trump's endless boorish irreverence for, Russian interests, as it would appear. Putin's incredibly tepid response to Trump saying that he is going to potentially put Tomahawk missiles in Ukraine. In fact, some intelligence suggests that they're already there. In the numbers, it might be around 50. And Putin just said, well, we're going to have to strengthen our defense systems. This is a nuclear-capable platform, mind you, right? So we've went progressively from helmets to javelins to Abrams tanks to what was before the ATACMS. I can't even remember what was before the ATACMS. HIMARS. And then we went to ATACMS. Then we went to F-16s. Then we went to ERABs. Now we're really the penultimate weapon, in the U.S. arsenal that's, kind of a threshold nuclear capable platform. And arguably maybe the F-16 is potentially more dangerous in that regard. And the Russians have yet to falter. in this strategic forbearance plan in an attempt to continuously try to assuage Donald Trump's ego whilst continuing to march forward on the front lines. The question is, how long can that be sustained, right? Because they're temporizing, they're trying to buy time. Here's what I think is going on. The most parsimonious explanation of what is happening right now with Vladimir Putin's strategy is that he is buying time because he knows that day X is inevitable. Remember, 2019, this was all written in the stars. We knew that this day would come, right? I mean, maybe some people didn't think it would be Trump again, but we knew that the Tomahawk missiles would be eventually sent to Europe and sent to Ukraine because they backed out of the INF Treaty. All this stuff was written long ago. So Putin, knowing that a war is coming, knowing that day X is practically inevitable at this point, is right now engaged in what I would call a public reassurance campaign, where his responsibility to his constituents is to attempt to downplay and minimize panic. And this has actually been what has alleviated a lot of my concerns over the last 3 years. You know, the Americans or the Ukrainians would do something crazy, you know, would overstep a red line, they would bomb someplace in Crimea, fly a drone into the Kremlin, and then everybody was like, holy shit, you know, what's the response going to be? And it was always some kind of flaccid response from the Russians, right? It was never the kind of sensational, oh, we're going to get you, never the emotional response that we all thought. And thank God for that, right? Because most countries by now would have not even overreacted, just reacted and pushed back. Now, part of the reason why we're in this predicament is arguably because the Russians haven't pushed back. If you look at the approach of the Chinese, what did they do when Trump tried to play that game? They immediately pushed back. They say, well, okay, we see your 100 and we raise you 100% tariffs, right? They're not relenting. And they don't have to, because right now, even though trade with the United States is down like 28%, the Chinese economy is still growing and their exports are growing. Every single month, they're exporting more and more stuff to other countries. So just like a friend of the channel, Peter Schiff, was warning, they're just going to send that stuff somewhere else. Okay, we don't want to give our paper money, our fiat money, which is being debased right now, which is why gold is going through the roof. Okay, they'll give it to somebody else. And the Russians have taken a different strategy. They're trying to play it real cool. Now, there could be a 4D chess move that Vladimir Putin is playing here. Vladimir Putin could be setting up a situation where the conditions that might foment a rebellious spirit inside the Russian people, getting them to demand Putin be more aggressive. And then Putin can say, well, you know, I didn't want it to be this way, but you, the people, have chosen. Now we have to go to war. Now we have to turn it up a notch. Now we got to mobilize even more. Because the people who are surrounding Putin right now are saying to themselves, look, our refineries are getting knocked out. These guys are boarding our ships in international waters. They're targeting pretty much anywhere they want. They've been targeting, you know, Vladimir Putin's villas. They've been, you know, targeting the nuclear radars, the nuclear bombers. I mean, we're not that far removed from Operation Spiderweb. And now they're going to give Tomahawk missiles. I mean, really, what is next after that? Think about it. If Trump came out tomorrow and said, you know what? We got the best nuclear. I do a really bad Trump impression some days. But we got the best nuclear, you know, we could, maybe we're just going to have to give them the nuclear, you know. The Ukrainians want nuclear. I said, hey, you know, that could create a world war, but, you know, and he'll say it in such a way which will dismiss the idea. But the seed for that conversation was already planted 2 years ago when the Ukrainians, in fact, stated that they might pursue a nuclear bomb and that they were thinking about it. Now, those statements were immediately walked back because the Russian response was fairly aggressive at that time, for the Russians, that is, which really amounted to some stern rhetoric. But we are currently in a space where Trump could come out tomorrow and he could just throw it out there. immediately people would be like, oh, can't believe he said that, giving the Ukrainians nuclear weapons. Plus they have the Tomahawks and they have the delivery systems. The Ukrainians got some big-ass missiles right now that they've been creating. Well, NATO has been creating under the guise of Ukraine. And people would be immediately taken aback and stunned by this. And Dmitry Medvedev would come on the next day and be like, right? And then it would die down. And then a couple of weeks would go by, and then the issue would be brought up again. And then it wouldn't be so bad because we would be systematically desensitized to it. We are fast approaching the point where they're going to start to introduce into the discourse the possibility of giving Ukraine nuclear weapons. If not that, it's going to be troops inside Ukraine. And for people who are wondering, why doesn't Trump just get out of the war? The whole objective of NATO and the whole objective of the United States with the US dollar as a reserve currency is to keep the Europeans down, the Germans down effectively, keep the Russians out, and keep the Americans in. If Trump tries to extricate himself from this conflict, then Europe could either reach a rapprochement with the Russians and rebuild Nord Stream and be very prosperous, and everybody's going to flock to the euro, which of course is the chief competitor to the US dollar, or the Russians will win and start to steamroll Europe, which, look, I mean, Russia is unified culturally, not so much religiously, but politically, and all of these 32, if you don't count the United States, I guess it would be 31. If you count Ukraine, it would be 32. All these 32 states who all speak different languages, sure, they have a degree of interoperability, but they're not homogenous. They don't have one unified command structure. And all of them, when you have this coalition of forces, none of them will ever want to put their best foot forward because they'll always withhold their best for themselves for when the bad guy is going to come and get them. And that is why people will say, well, look at the slow progress that Russia is making in Ukraine. You can't necessarily extrapolate that to how it would play out in the rest of Europe. The Ukrainians are hardened fighters. They have a massive army, which is getting the full support of NATO, more or less. They don't have the F-35s, they don't have some of the fancier stuff. But in terms of brute force, strength, they have that. They have the experience. If the Russians can not only defeat the Ukrainians, but absorb some of that military, then there is a good possibility that they could go further. And, you know, they might just be emboldened by that. And of course, they already have the Russian-speaking people in these countries. And I'm not necessarily someone who fully subscribes to the idea that post-Soviet Union, they made sure that there was a sizable Russian population in every country that would ultimately be subjugated by the majority who didn't speak that language, and that would be cause for the Russians to come in and have to rescue those people, very similar to what happened in the Donbass. I don't fully subscribe to that because I don't really know what to think because there's so much bullshit on all sides of this. But what I do know is it's a possibility. And this is why Trump has to stay in there, okay? Now, Trump is going to do this thing where he's bluffing with Tomahawks for a while, but I don't think he's bluffing. I really don't think that we should bet on a Trump bluff at this point. Because say what you will about Trump, usually, you know, he makes good on his promises, however outlandish they might seem at any given time. And really anything goes at this point. Now, the Tomahawks are also, you know, the 80s were the heyday of America, really. Coca-Cola, Michael Jackson, Mike Tyson, all these things, right? And this is where Trump's brain lives, right? He actually thinks that this technology, which was at one point, you know, the pinnacle of military technology, is actually, you know, translates today into being that formidable. But I think we will quickly learn, as we're learning in the case of the Chinese, that America is not the superpower it once was. It's still a massive powerhouse, don't get me wrong. However, in terms of the up-and-comers and they've completely lost all soft power. This Nobel Peace Prize thing has lost all meaning. It's the farthest thing from sacrosanct when you have a puppet government win the Peace Prize, who just so happens to be poised to enter into that position when the United States is surrounding this country with military equipment and extrajudiciously murdering people in boats that they refer to as narco-terrorists. I mean, the whole thing is a farce, right? The Western Empire is collapsing. This is why gold, as measured in US dollars, is skyrocketing. I mean, it is happening right now. You see over my shoulder there, that YouTube gold plaque from Canadian Prepper and the silver one from the Prepper News, those used to actually be made. They used to actually contain real gold. And talk about a great metaphor for the slippery slope of the Americas. They no longer are made of, I don't think there's any gold in that. There might be a little tiny bit. I think even during the peak, there was just a little bit, but there was a little bit, kind of like gold medals. They used to be gold medals, right? So everything's been diluted, clipped. The coins are getting clipped, right? And debased to the point where it's just an artifice. If there's any paper tiger, it's this, right? And YouTube is going to phase us out soon with AI influencers. So that's why we got to keep it progressively more real. Got to get John Connor on their ass for the revolution. Now, the big announcement is expected to happen tomorrow with respect to weapons deliveries to Ukraine, but we might not hear anything official about the Tomahawks until Friday, when Zelensky goes to meet with Trump. Now, this could be an old door-in-the-face sales tactic where they make this outrageous proposition. You know, we're going to give them a nuclear-capable intermediate-range missile, right? And then they pull it back and they say, okay, maybe we won't do that, but we're going to give them some JSOMs instead, right? So it doesn't seem as bad. Oh, okay. Everybody breathes a sigh of relief. They're already talking about Germany, compelling Germany to send the Taurus missiles, which I'm sure are also a nuclear-capable platform, if I'm not mistaken. And it's a newer platform, which could potentially evade Russian defenses even more. Remember, all of this, the reason why the stakes get higher and higher, it's not even that the weapon itself, it's that all of this stuff is stacking. You got 2 new NATO members. You got more nuclear exercises happening, it seems, every other week. Okay, there's all of this reconnaissance activity along the Russian borders. There's the threats to Kaliningrad by American generals. There's the boarding of ships in Russia. There's the constant drone strikes. All of that data, which is not only being, assisted in the targeting by the Americans, but they're actually picking the targets. Okay, you got Starlink. You have the surrounding from Patufic Air Base in the north, in Greenland, all the way down to Turkey and the Black Sea, okay? You have Russia completely surrounded, now even in the Caspian Sea with Armenia, Azerbaijan, and they're closing in. They're just slowly closing in. So it's not just the Tomahawks. It's the fact that Russia becomes increasingly more disadvantaged to NATO as the longer this goes on. And Vladimir Putin can keep dismissing it, right? Because he probably knows in the end, what are they going to do, right? But the question is, where does the line eventually get drawn? And maybe Putin wants to play out this public reassurance campaign because he wants to minimize panic. He doesn't want his population to think that there's going to be a nuclear war with NATO. So he has to kind of downplay everything. And here's the thing. If we play that tape through to the end, where does it end? I mean, could there be Abrams tanks rolling up on the Kremlin front lawn and Putin is still saying, I understand Mr. Trump's predicament. We do not necessarily see eye to eye on certain issues, but we're still open to diplomacy. It would be something like that, something incredibly over-the-top congenial. And this is the problem, is that this is how you know it's bullshit, right? This is how you know one of Putin's major MOs is crowd control. The problem is, what if people start to get pissed? And maybe that's the 4D chess move, is that he is trying to get the people to tell him, to command him to up the ante, to respond, so that then he can kind of somewhat be absolved of that decision making, and then it can't be held against him, because he can say, well, I was entertaining this path of diplomacy, and you wanted me to be less jurisprudent and just go for the gusto, and that's what I did, and now we're in a full-scale war with NATO, right? It's not my fault. It's your fault, because that's what you wanted. That's the 4D chess blade, but I really think this is all about buying time. He knows day X is coming, the day when either Russia capitulates or it's a decapitation strike. Because no matter what they say, wars only end when one side wins. One side has to win. That's the only reason why World War II ended. That's the only reason why the Cold War ended, is because one side imploded and could no longer fight. If that doesn't happen, which it doesn't appear it's going to happen in the case of Russia, and in fact, I just thought of something. If I was the United States or any European nation like Ukraine, and I wanted to provoke a response, what is the thing that you could do to provoke a real response from the Russians? Think about it for a second. What could you do to make the Russians go rogue and throw caution to the wind and escalate? You would kill Vladimir Putin. Something to think about. That's what they would do. Because who's next in line? It's Dmitry Medvedev. At least he would be the one who would make the decision, who would say yay or nay on whatever sort of military reprisal was set forth thereafter. So, could happen. Which is not to say it would be easy, because that guy's got a lot of security, but who knows? It could even be an inside job, right? It's really hard to say. So I do not dismiss. There's a bit of a feud, some drama going on in the, I don't know what you would call this brosint space with Scott Ritter and Professor Doctorow, I believe. I kind of side with Doctorow in this, in that, because Ritter's usually always wrong about the big league stuff, like always wrong. Like every single thing. If Ritter says that there's not going to be a coup in Russia, I'm almost like, okay, when's there going to be a coup in Russia? Because this guy has just been, predictably wrong ever since the beginning on the big stuff. Incredibly knowledge of technical, analysis and military speak. But when it comes to, he's blinded by this over-romanticization of Russia, and he's a bit of a Russophile, which is weird because apparently, he always brags about how his mission was to kill Russians. I was trained to kill Russians, to hate Russians. Then I learned to love them. Now I love Mother Russia and all this stuff. But I lean towards the Doctorow perspective, which is, Putin's seat of power is not a foregone conclusion. He is not indomitable, and he does have other oligarchs that he has to appease. Right? He's not just, he's one guy. At the end of the day, he's one guy who is confiding in the people around him to not overthrow him. So there are risks there. And the more pressure that Russia gets put on with this oil price being so low, with the refineries being blown, the shadow fleets getting blown up, the drones and the missiles and all this stuff, the more pressure and the more he responds in a way which is not aggressive enough and not appeasing people's bloodlust, then the Hawks are going to come after him. They will, or it will be festering under the surface because they're all scared to say anything, and that's when you get into this paranoid dictator doom loop, right? Where, you start suspecting everybody. So, yeah, Zelensky's traveling to Washington on Friday. And who knows, maybe they're going to announce that they're going to get nukes. I mean, at the end of the day, Ukraine has the capacity to build a dirty bomb. They probably have all the systems in place that they could really, theoretically, they know enough. They're allied with pretty much every NATO nation, with the exception of a few. And so that technology would be within their grasp to put it on a warhead and deliver it to Moscow. Now, if they did that, of course, I mean, it's good night, Irene. And the Russians have been using more of these, they look like graphite bombs because there's these bright blue flashes, and they're using these bombs over various power plants in Kiev, Kharkov, places like that, blacking out like half the city. And I don't know if it's permanent or what, but these bombs, they have these carbon filament particles that will couple into the transformer and effectively short circuit the whole thing. Now, I don't know if it's a temporary damage, but if it is, and looking at the supply chain as it is, and China's saying fuck you to everyone, and they're the ones who build all these things, well then, you know, that's potentially a bad deal for Ukraine. I think China could eventually be the deciding factor in this war. If they come to Russia's support, and if, what is that old saying, you know, when goods stop flowing across borders, armies will. If we suspend trade with China and Trump ramps up this tariff war, China has no real incentive then to withhold anything from Russia. And they'll help them militarily. And could you imagine the Chinese military industry backing the Russians? I mean, it's game over. It's game over in Europe. Game over. Done. Finito. Forget about it. So we're not playing this right. This doesn't make sense. The only thing we got is decapitation and sneaky Machiavellian, you know, pager explosions and various trickery like that. That's all we got. If we can't do it asymmetrically, we're fucked. Reports say that the United States might send about 50 Tomahawk missiles first. The United States has thousands, but only a small number can be spared quickly because of limited new production. Now, okay, just maybe you can answer this question. We have thousands of Tomahawk missiles. What are they planning on using these Tomahawk missiles for? Oh, they're just worried that a war is going to pop off where they're going to have to unload thousands of Tomahawk missiles. Now, I don't know how many of these things were fired in the Gulf War or Afghanistan, but I presume 1,000 should last you quite a long time. So what are you preparing for? I don't think that's the issue anyways. Belarus is warning that the Tomahawk transfer could trigger nuclear war. Well, I'll be dithered. Who would have thought? United States pressuring Germany to send Taurus missiles, increasing their pressure on Germany because, of course, they want them to be the fall guy. And then they're going to send the Tomahawks. They're going to say, Germany, listen, maybe this is the play. Maybe this is the door in the face. They're going to walk it back. They're going to say, okay, we're not going to send the Tomahawks, but Germany, we're going to give them the Tomahawks, and Germany's going to send their Taurus to Ukraine. Maybe that's what's going to happen. NATO suspects Russian drones disrupted Dutch soldiers in Poland. During the Falcon Autumn exercise in Poland, Dutch soldiers were disrupted by unknown drones and had communications effective. The Russian tentacles run deep. Now, some people are suspecting, and this is a Norwegian professor, is claiming that the United States would send Tomahawks to Ukraine only if Ukraine commits to total mobilization. You know, all those guys in the nightclubs in Ukraine still partying, well, they're all under 25. So they're immune from the military draft. But not for long, apparently. So this would be a Tomahawk for bodies sort of swap. So, and this, remember, it was, wasn't it, what was the former National Secretary of National, was it National Defense? Mike, what the hell was his name before he got canned or sent to the UN? Anyways, he wanted Ukraine to lower their mobilization age to 18. What the hell was his name again? You guys can write it in the description section. Marco Rubio basically took up his post. Anyways, so it seems like they're pushing for that now. And so could you imagine? That could potentially cause a lot of protests inside Ukraine. And they would have to be very, very subtle with how they implemented such a move. Because that could be their undoing if they send the flower of the youth to die in the trenches. Russia and Ukraine, I should say, is not the only one who is broadening their mobilization. A government commission in Russia approved legal changes so that the defense ministry can call up reservists on a rolling basis and send them to training and missions, including outside of Russia, without declaring a formal mobilization or war. Decisions can be made directly by Vladimir Putin. And so They're also planning on mobilizing citizens who have taken residency in other countries, which could potentially affect up to 5 million people. Now, how they're going to enforce that, I doubt those countries are going to extradite those individuals. But they're getting ready to call up reservists on a regular basis, as opposed to these seasonal type mobilizations, which means that they're about to expand the military in a big, big way. Just a reminder, guys, if you want, we're getting cleaned out here at Canadian Preparedness. It's kind of sad seeing the shelves so empty, but use discount code 30PREP for 30% off the biggest brand name survival products that you're ever going to find. We're in a situation here where we're trying to liquidate quickly because of the space that we're in. We're getting ready to potentially make a move. So we're trying to just get things out the door. And these are things which, you know, if I intended on continuing to do business with these countries, I would be in violation of these companies. I'd be in violation of MAP, right? So you're getting like insane deals, man. Like you'll get silky saws for prices you're never going to get them for ever again. I mean, all of the high-end gear that we carry, and we carry everything, right? Every high-end, I mean, this would be, if the apocalypse hit tomorrow, our warehouse would be a gold mine, right? The government and their shitty bureaucrat friends would move in here instantly and expropriate everything. Fortunately, we have plan B, C, D, and E. But get it while it's good, because I mean, I'm deadly serious. These are deals that you just don't see on the most premium products that are built for the rigors of SHTF. Go get it while you can. German intelligence warns Russia could start a war with Europe at any moment. Germany's really spooked about war with the Russians, aren't they? I mean, they just had a pipeline, you know? Think about the relationship that could have been and what has now happened. They had a pipeline, they could have got cheap gas. I mean, everything could have been great, but no, they nuked it. And now they have no choice but to continue to push forward. No choice whatsoever. It's basically Russian decapitation or bust for Europe because they need those resources. And this is actually what I fear, going on a tangent here in the U.S., is that the right, I hate using these terms, but MAGA is setting a certain set of conditions that it's almost like if they ever relinquish control again, they're going to have to be hiding in the bunkers because the left is going to abuse the hell out of all of these new government powers that have been put into place. Even though I know that left versus right is meaningless at the top. And you've seen that with the technocrats. They'll align themselves with anybody. You know, they did it with Biden. Okay, Trump's in, we'll align with him now. You know, we'll unblock whoever you want to say. They have no loyalty or allegiance to your constitutional rights and civil liberties. They only have a loyalty to themselves and their clique. And that transcends any sort of political boundaries. So my concern is that if it's true that there are, like, you know, hardliners in Republican hardliners, they are going to be very reluctant to ever seize control because, you know, if Trump does pursue lawfare, and in fairness, Trump had lawfare waged against him. So this is not a question of, you know, moralizing who's better and who's a good guy, who's a bad guy. This is just to say that this is going to escalate, and either they're going to do something crazy to prevent the Dems from ever getting in again, or when the Dems do get in, they're going to say, now we got these paramilitary in the streets, everybody's used to that, and we got these other draconian laws that you've put in place for us, thank you very much. Hey, maybe it's time for another pandemic, right? And now that we've got you all acclimated to a quasi-martial law state of lockdown, we're going to marry the lockdowns with the police in the streets, right? And then match made in heaven, game over for freedom and liberty. Yep, it's going to happen. It's all going to happen. It's all going to happen. Nuclear war, everything. Hyperinflation, you know, civil war, it's all going to happen at the same time. Even the climate stuff, it's going to, you know, things are going to get really hot right around the time that, and maybe nuclear war kind of swoops in and saves the day and drops the temperature a few degrees. Who knows? The U.S. Army has unveiled a plan to power bases with tiny nuclear reactors. Now, I want you to think about this for a second. The U.S. is going to power their military bases with tiny nuclear reactors. Now, could you see that being leveraged defensively, strategically, or perhaps weaponized offensively? Of course you can, because you're thinking, right? So imagine a Geneva Convention which states that you cannot target critical infrastructure, much less critical infrastructure nuclear power plants. I believe it's Geneva Convention Article 14 or something, which is you cannot target nuclear power plants. So hey, a great way to put, what's next best thing next to a human shield? A nuclear shield. And this is what both the Ukrainians and the Russians are doing. This is why they store all their weapons in nuclear power plants. Well, it was just, we're just chilling here and you started attacking this nuclear power plant. It also could potentially mask a nuclear weapons signature. So if you had nuclear weapons at a said base overseas and you wanted to put a nuclear power plant there, I'm sure there's a lot of red tape that would prevent that in most jurisdictions, but you could potentially it would create a smokescreen for the deployment of actual offensive nuclear weapons. So, because you can detect these things with various types of sensors. So anyways, they're going to be putting, I guess they would be like small modular reactors in various military bases. So the Pentagon press are effectively going on strike. Major news outlets like Fox, CNN, CBS, NBC, Associated Press, New York Times, Washington Post, and others have all refused to sign a Pentagon NDA or whatever you want to call it, which effectively limits what they can report on and it restricts what they can publish. Now, I know what you're thinking. This is the mainstream media. This is all of the Pentagon correspondents, and 90% of them are going to be walking soon. Now, apparently, a lot of the things that Hegseth is saying are exaggerated, and they have to follow these protocols already anyways. This is really because they're preparing for World War III, the same reason why they brought all the generals into that room in Quantico to make sure everybody's on the same page. And when Day X unfolds, they're going to have control of the media and control of the top brass. Well, that's what this is. It's an extension of that. So even though we all know the mainstream media is bullshit, okay, there you go, Captain Obvious. You don't have to write that in the comment section. We all know that, but at the same time, this is problematic because it's a very slippery slope. And why should we presume? I mean, Candace Owens made an excellent point. And I'm going to actually try to get a hold of her because I think, if I can relate to anybody, it's her on some issues. Some issues. Others but she made a very good point. And she said, isn't it amazing how they want us to thank them for ending a war that they funded, right? A genocide that they funded. And now they have the audacity to want to expect some kind of thank you for ending the shit that they started. It's really incredible. Thank you for ending the genocide, right? But this is something that extends beyond, just the Hamas war. This is everything. They initiated a war with Iran. They're about to start some shit with Venezuela. He's only ramped up the war in ways that Biden would have never even ramped up the war against Russia. So people are delusional. I mean, talking about these 7, tribal conflicts he resolved in Africa. Nobody knows what the fuck he's talking about. Pakistan, India, they both denied. Of course they're both gonna, pay lip service to the king, the emperor who has no clothes, because, what else is there to do, right? You're trying to get a decent seat at the table, even though the house is burning down. But at the end of the day, I mean, this is all nonsense. The Geneva Convention, or the Nobel Prize, I should say, is a complete joke. It's a complete abomination that Norway should have some kind of moral monopoly over who's good and who's bad is just stupid. Norway is a country of like 10 million people. Why the fuck do they get to give out prizes that are, that set the world standard? Like, does that even make sense? I mean, I get there's a tradition to it, but, some of these things fundamentally don't make sense when you really think about it. Anyways, only one American news organization agreed. I can't remember which one it was. Oh, I'm sure they're going to be given the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Yep. Oh, OANN. I don't even know who that is. And OpenAI is trying to expand its revenue, and they're going to get into porn. So a major artificial intelligence company will allow adult erotica for adult users, which critics say will increase energy and water use for large AI systems and benefit large technology firms and chip makers. So get this. Future historians, they're going to say, they boiled the oceans for a boner. That's what we did. We're going to boil the oceans so that people can watch some weird, whatever AI, pornographic, metaverse experience you want to imagine. Who knows how off the rails it's going to get by the time this thing runs its course. I'm sure we'll destroy ourselves before that point. But when we go full Ready Player One on this, this is how they're going to make their money. And it makes sense because, OpenAI was, if you want to get some entertainment, go and play with Grok Unhinged and put on the 18 plus mode. And it's going to tell you the weirdest things. I should do a dedicated video on it now that I think about it. The communist cameraman is scared of it. And that's one thing I'll say about the communist cameraman is that he's a technophobe. And maybe that's where, the communist mentality and the redneck mentality might kind of come together a little bit. But OpenAI, as of December, you're going to be able to get your adult erotica kicks using the water and the energy, which is, of course, going to be in short supply. But we're doing it all for the NUKE, as Fred Durst would say. It's going to be just radioactive, cesspool of debauchery, and we did it all for the NUKE. That's what the historians will say. Silver shortage. Physical silver is hard to get. You go on any Canadian website, and you can get coins, but you can't get anything over a 10-ounce bar. Now, this fluctuates from day to day. When I checked last night, you even go on TD. TD is another major precious metals distributor, and I just check in because I like to see what and cross-reference what I'm reading. I don't really stack or anything, but it's good because it's a thermometer of social chaos, right? So I always keep pace with it, and this runaway silver and gold price clearly is an indication that something is broken. Now, you can go on the TD website, and apparently you can put it in your cart, but then it said there's a message that pops up and says you've exceeded the limit for how much you can purchase. You can only purchase like $3,000 Canadian worth of silver. And so if you try to purchase 100 ounce, which I believe is around 8,000, closing in on $8,000 right now, Canadian that is, maybe about 6,000 American, it tells you that you've exceeded the limit. So it's like, why have it on the site in the first place? Is that just to create confusion? Is there some technical glitch there I'm not aware of? But many other websites are out of the physical stuff, which is crazy, okay? And this is why you're having what's called backwardation, where the spot price is actually exceeding the futures price. And usually it's reversed. And that basically means that people are wanting the metal right now. So that sense of urgency is somewhat concerning, that people are wanting the metals right now, not just people, institutions, hedge funds, when I say people, I'm talking about billionaires, right? Central banks. The Perth Mint halted all silver product sales, allegedly. And again, these things, can fluctuate from hour to hour. Indian dealers failed to deliver after taking dozens of orders and online payments. Amazon sellers in India defaulted on delivery. The Royal Canadian Mint and major Canadian banks listed many silver bars as out of stock. And Asahi Fine in Japan ran out of ingots. Bullion banks reportedly stopped leasing physical silver to each other at normal rates. In London, the shortage is described as severe forcing banks either to buy back futures or deliver real silver, which of course is hard to do. Reports from China say small retail silver bars are selling around $108 to $120 US an ounce. Spot price of silver at the time of making this video is around $52, $53. They're selling it for $123 an ounce. That's what people are willing to pay in China. Far above Western spot prices. Does this mean that we are going to start seeing a localized pricing of commodities in the future? This is the multipolar decoupling that we've all been fearing. That means oil, metals, all these things which were internationally priced before, are they going to start to become priced on a country-by-country basis? It's possible, but then you have arbitrage, right? So there's a lot of money being made there, that which will bid the price up or down depending on which way the wind is blowing. Despite U.S. tariffs, Chinese exports are breaking records. Listen to that again. Chinese exports in September were up 8.3%. That's $328 billion, although Chinese exports to the U.S. were down 27%. Who needs who? This is why China is now entering aggressively into the trade war. They've managed to reroute the exports to the United States. They don't care anymore. You know, we have the rare earth market and processing cornered, and go F yourself. What does Donald Trump say? Well, you know, we're going to not buy, we believe that China is purposely not buying our soybeans and causing us difficulty for our soybean farmers. I can't help think of like the whole woke soy boy thing. Is an economically hostile act. We are considering terminating business with China having to do with cooking oil and other elements of trade as retribution. No more cooking oil and fried chicken for you. Taco. Iranian oil tankers are beginning broadcasting tracking signals again. So they turned them off before, and the reason why they're turning them on is because they're worried about the Americans boarding these vessels, and then they don't have like an alibi. They don't have the transponders on, so there would be plausible deniability. Now, if the transponders are on, then when the ships get boarded, they have proof. They can say, hey, we were kind of playing by the rules, and you did this act of war, this embargo against us. That's what's going on in the world, my friends. I have talked long enough. Don't forget, get your Jace medical medication. I always talk about gold and silver as being the thermometer of social chaos, but at the end of the day, you have to have your base needs covered. Ammunition is only going to go up in price. Look at the price of copper, antimony. I mean, all of these ingredients that you would need. Tungsten, silver, palladium, platinum, gold. They're all going up in price. Get your ammo, get your antibiotics from Jace Medical, get your freeze-dried food, because that freeze-dried beef that you bought back in 2020 is now double, if not triple the price in some respects. So seize the day and get discounted freeze-dried food right now, CanadianPreparedness.com. Just get stuff, commodities. Commodities are something that's always going to hold their value, presuming that it is not technology bound, and there's suspicion now that this AI bubble is bursting because it's been determined that these data centers, they become obsolete in 3 to 10 years, and they cost bazillions of dollars to create, and they don't make that much money in that period of time. So unless we have some super AI, intelligence revolution soon, the bubble could potentially burst. But that's the real wild card here, is of all the things I've just said, you still have the possibility for AI. And I think they already have AGI, and I think they're getting close to super AI. And they're not going to give it to the public. That's the thing. They're never going to give it to the public. Never. They're always going to withhold it because it's a weapon. And so we're not going to know. We're just going to find out, which is why I would rather find out surrounded by forests and the birds chirping, far away from a lot of people in a low population density environment with the self-sufficient systems in place to ride out whatever may come. And it's coming everywhere. There's no place to hide. And whether I go to Montana or Alberta, eventually, it's going to find me. But until that time, I guess we're the resistance, guys. Thanks for watching. Canadian Prepper out.